Hi everyone, my name is Adelaide Perr and I am the author of the new book, Deep Love, Every Scar Has a Story, which follows my recovery after a bike crash in 2014. And I talk about the impact it had on my relationship. I talk about how it impacted my mental health since I suffer from bipolar 2, what it was like to go through the legal challenges, and much more. So I'll do the 8 questions to answer. Number 1 is, you've been through a horrific crash and an incredible journey to recovery, both physically and mentally. At what point during all of this did you know you had to write this book? I really like to read, and I think reading is great for learning new things. And so when I was in the hospital in the subsequent recovery, I was learning a lot about my crash that surprised me. I didn't expect. And so I think I had that reader approach where I was like, oh, this is stuff I would like to learn in a book. And so I just started writing it. Over time, the book definitely took on many other themes, and it talks a lot more about the emotional recovery than just the physical recovery. But I think the physical recovery and what I learned there was what initially was interesting to me and caused me to want to start writing some of it down. Why do you feel it's important to share your story? My physical injuries are unique to me, but a lot of what I talk about in the book is not unique. It talks about trauma and relationships and mental health and what it's like to be a victim. These are things that often go undiscussed in our society, but anyone that makes it to adulthood has been through something. I feel like we all share these difficult experiences in our life. And so it's really just to be a conversation starter, to open the door and to help people feel less alone in the hard things that we all experience as humans. All right, next question is, how differently were you supported as you recovered from your crash as opposed to when you were first diagnosed with bipolar 2? When I was first diagnosed with bipolar 2, I had the support of the psychiatrist who diagnosed me, and also the nutritionist who I was seeing, who helped get me to the psychiatrist, which was important. My family offered unconditional love, but I think it took them a long time to learn the intricacies of what bipolar means. Whereas after my crash, it was very public, and I was receiving letters in the hospital, not only from friends that I hadn't seen in years, but from friends of my parents who I didn't know, and even complete strangers. To be fair, I did not share my bipolar diagnosis with very many people in those early years because I didn't know how to. And it was only after my crash that I realized that people do want to support you, but they have to know how. And I began to sharing it more because it was very helpful to have people's support after the physical injuries of my crash. And I decided that I wanted to have that same support for my mental health as well. Were there parts of your story that were very painful to recount in this book? Were there parts that were therapeutic to tell? The parts that were therapeutic to tell were the ones that I got to interview other people to hear their experiences. For instance, I talk about the police officer who was the first responder at the scene, and I later interviewed him. And those interviews and getting to meet the people who helped me, that was very therapeutic. The parts that were painful to recount were the ones where I talk about things in my life that did not go as I had planned, times where I had taken my anger out, particularly on Kenneth, who's my dear husband who has supported me through all of this. And so those emotions, those anger and fear and a lot of the ups and downs of bipolar are things that were hard for me to write and then edit because it meant I was reliving them a bit. And nobody likes to relive the hard parts in their life. Next question is, you've gone through a traumatizing and also incredible journey in your life. What aspect of your journey so far has surprised you most? Writing the book. I'm still a little bit in disbelief that this book actually became a thing and that I wrote it, because it just was such a long process, and there were a lot of times where I wasn't sure if it would come to fruition or what it would look like, and it's been great to hear people's feedback on it and know that it made it to the bookstore. How did you get to a point where you could get back on the bike, not just physically, but mentally? Physically, I talk about getting back on the bike almost immediately, and how I just had this sheer joy of being out there because I was just out of the hospital and I had almost died. So there were a lot of aspects of life that just seemed so joyous because I was looking at them through the lens of having almost lost my life. Over time and riding in more traffic, I did experience symptoms of PTSD. I've since gone back for trauma therapy, and that has helped. And I also pick and choose the days that I ride. If I'm feeling very anxious for some reason, I may choose to do a different activity than ride my bike these days, just to honor myself. But I do ride most days, and I still love riding. What have you been doing during the pandemic to care for yourself? I've been focusing on really paying attention to what my body and my heart need. That means that some days if I go for a run and I notice I'm running really slow and my body's lethargic, I try and just honor that and do low-key activities for a few days until my energy bounces back. I've been doing a lot of phone calls with friends to maintain my relationships, even though I'm not seeing them in person. And lastly, can you read us a short passage from your book? Absolutely. So from Saturday through Wednesday, I remained in a dark hospital room. Under the control of the respirator, my chest rose and fell. My eyes were taped shut and my face was covered with ointments and gauze. A halo of matted hair surrounded my swollen face on the pillow. IVs extended from my left bicep, and the cocktail of drugs running through my veins made sure I wouldn't wake up, wouldn't dream, and wouldn't have any memories as a coma patient. Those awake, both family members and people I had heard about my story from afar, were the ones plagued with uncomfortably intense emotions. The type of sick-to-your-stomach feelings that demand priority over all other thoughts and coexist only with a sense of dread about what the future holds. My mom flew into the Denver airport on Sunday morning while I was recovering from a successful first surgery. Lydia picked her up from the airport, and at my mom's request, they drove straight to the hospital. Though the 50 miles were mostly highway, it seemed to drive like city traffic gridlock. Lydia and my mom entered through the hospital's main sliding doors, past a grand piano, across the large atrium, which housed a Panera-like cafeteria to the left. A narrow hallway with cream-colored walls and cheerful artwork led to the ICU. Another door took them to the waiting area where they checked in at the visitor's desk, washed their hands in the stainless steel sink, and got buzzed in through the heavy wooden door to intensive care. ICU was set up in a square with rooms on the outside walls and a nurse's station in the center. My sister led my mom to the room, a left then a right, and then there was several doors down on the left-hand side. Each room had a sliding glass door separating the patient from the hallway, which allowed massive medical devices to be moved in and out. As my mom looked through the glass, she could see the equipment and monitors crowding my bed. My mom paused at the door for a split second, her eyes focused on all the IVs in my arm. Lydia stepped aside to let her go first. The nurse, Jody, had her attention focused on me and didn't initially notice I had visitors. My mom asked Jody, "Can I walk around and see her face and hold her hand?" "Sure, that's all right. I'm monitoring her medication right now because we're having a difficult time keeping her sedated." As my mom came around the bed, she gently touched my fingers, the only part of my hand not taped over to hold the IV lines in place. "It's okay, it's okay. I couldn't get here any faster. We're here." In response to my mom's arrival, I grew agitated and a small tear rolled down from my one open eye. My mom wasn't sure if the tear signified that I was in pain, relieved to see her, or terrified that her presence meant that my injuries were severe. I imagine it must have been all three combined. I wish I could have told my mom, "Don't worry, I've had enough pain medication. If I could, I would give you a big hug." I chose that passage to read because when my mom first told me about that tear running down my eye while I was sedated as she walked in the room, it really choked me up. I was interviewing my mom, and I was actually really surprised at the amount of emotion that I had the first time I had heard that story, since I had not been awake and didn't remember it. Anyway, I hope you guys go out and buy the book from the bookstore, Boulder Bookstore, and enjoy it. Thank you.